Soup, 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 soup.
Today's soup is a combination of two recipes. The assignment given required me to combine a recipe for potato soup and another for corn chowder. While this task may seem simple at first, there was an additional challenge. Wherever possible, I was supposed to reduce the amount of sodium and fat. As a result, a new list of ingredients and the quantities has been created. I will display this list at the end of the program, so you may wish to have a pen and paper handy. Before doing anything food-related, it's always a good idea to wash your hands thoroughly with warm water and soap. After washing my hands, I gathered the ingredients required to make my new recipe. The first thing I did for the sake of convenience was to chop my various ingredients. I started this process by chopping up 6 slices of bacon. At first I used a knife to do this, but I found this to be tricky. I found it easier to cut the slices with a pair of scissors, not pictured. To this bacon, I added half an onion. I previously used the other half to make chicken noodle soup with cabbage. That video is also available on this channel. Here is the bacon once it was fried. This photo was taken prior to it being drained. Next, on a separate chopping board, I diced celery into small chunks. I peeled and then diced up some carrots. Here are the carrots and the celery in a pot waiting to be cooked. Lastly, I peeled and sliced a couple potatoes. I put all these chopped vegetables into a pot. In that pot, I added 2 cups of water. Only one of these is depicted in this image. I then proceeded to measure out 2 tablespoons of chicken bouillon, and added this to the vegetables. Once I had briefly stirred it, the mixture looked like this. While the veggies simmered, I decided to start on making the roux. Did you say roux, mate? I know how those are made. I'll start from the very beginning of the process. When a mummy kangaroo and a daddy kangaroo love each other very much. Stop! I'm afraid that's not the kind of roux. I meant roux. R-O-U-X. The Collins Scrabble Dictionary defines a roux as fat and flour cooked together as a basis for sauces. According to the Pioneer Woman, being able to whip up a roux is an essential skill every home cook should master. As a bonus, if you casually mention that you made a roux as a base for your soup, you might just impress a few of your friends. So with that information in hand, here's how to make one. Firstly, I measured my fat and flour. I used 1/4 cup of each. In the name of transparency, I must admit, however, that I used margarine instead of the butter recommended by the original recipe. I put it on low heat and allowed it to melt. To that I added the flour. I stirred this up. I measured out 4½ cups of milk and mixed it in with the melted margarine and flour. I continuously stirred this to make sure it didn't burn to the bottom. When the sauce had completed cooking, it became thick and a paste-like consistency. In this image, I followed the recommendations that the potato soup recipe provided and added 1 teaspoon of pepper. However, in future, I wouldn't do this, as I found the soup a tad too spicy for my liking. If you decide to make this recipe, I personally recommend you spice it to your taste, as you can easily add a little more pepper if need be, but you can't exactly remove the granules once added. Next, I added some sodium. A little salt goes a long way though. In total, I added a teaspoon of salt. Next, in order to make the recipe potato corn chowder, I had to add corn. I opened the tin of niblet kernel corn and I deposited the entire contents into the pot. I drained the bacon grease to cut back on fat. I also added the now drained bacon in with the corn, the mixture. Once the roux had finished, I added it to the rest of the ingredients. I stirred up the soup, and as some of the ingredients had gone cold, I allowed it to heat through. I ladled the finished product into a bowl and added parsley and crackers. Bon appetit! Here is the list of ingredients as was promised. This list should only be seen as a guide, as you may have other ideas for what to add depending on what you have in your cupboards or fridge. You may, for example, wish to add other kinds of vegetables. This is a good comfort food soup, especially for a cold, wintry afternoon. Though I do note there is some flexibility, I don't suggest you follow Mrs. Murphy's recipe.
Over the teeth, through the gums, look out stomach, here it comes! Won't you bring back Mrs. Murphy's chowder? It was tuneful, every spoonful, it made you yodel louder. After dinner, Uncle Ben used to fill his fountain pen from a plate of Mrs. Murphy's chowder. It had ice cream, sardines, saltines, jelly beans, soap scum, chewing gum, and of all the twine. Silk hats, doormats, bed slats, bric-a-brac, cowbells, doorbells, beckon you to dine. Meatballs, mothballs, baseballs, cannonballs, come on in, the chowder's fine. Won't you bring back, why won't you bring back Mrs. Murphy's chowder?